that something's being recorded, hopefully appearing on their top. There we go. So and then eventually at some point when I got over the IT issues, I shall go and share it with yourselves and the other members of the Northwest Tree Health Group who haven't been able to go and make it. So I've whittled a lot. That's probably more than enough for introduction. But if you've got questions, if you want to go and put them in the chat box facility at the side, I'll go and keep an eye on those. But Iben's very happy to go and answer questions until everyone's been exhausted, basically. So that's which is a fantastic offer. So I'll not say anything else now. I'll go and mute myself and let Iben get on.
Well, thank you very much, Barnaby, and for that introduction, and also for inviting me to give my talk, because I love talking about Ashbark. Well, I love talking about any kind of sick trees, but Ashbark is very close to my heart, and I'm very happy to be able to share the experiences we have from Denmark and what we have learned and what we know, or what our opinions are, so you can use them as much as you like for your own good, hopefully. So as you can see, I've called it management of novel ash dieback, because I know in Britain you had an older form of ash dieback, and so there's a bit of a grumpiness about calling it this new thing ash dieback. So I'm very happy to call it novel ash dieback. But in publications all over, it's mostly just called ash dieback. And so this is very much based on a Danish perspective, and it's very much based on knowledge has been collected by me and my colleagues, and you can see they're all mentioned at the base of this introduction slide here. So they are all people who've helped, contributed with data or information, and some of us has even made a publication that will be coming out hopefully fairly soon. Okay, so and here comes a special thing you have to go. Yes, so just so that we are all on the same information level here. So the cause of this disease, this novel ash dieback, is a fungus that's called Hymnoscyphus fraxineus. It is not originally a European fungus. It comes from Asia, and in Asia it lives together with the Asian ash species. And on those trees, on those hosts, it is either a harmless endophyte, so it lives in the living leaves and then until they fall off, or it can sometimes be a weak leaf pathogen, but it is not a pathogen of shoots and bark as we see it in Europe. And so this disease, the novel ash dieback disease, or the Adaby disease, whatever you want to call it, it is because of a host shift. So when this fungus was introduced into Europe, probably with the plants from Asia, either used for amenity trees or in forestry, in Russia, in the Baltic countries, this fungus got introduced to the European ash trees, the Fraxinus excelsior and angustifolia, and they have not evolved with this fungus. So on those hosts, the fungus does not just stay in the leaves, as you can see with this little host cycle I have here. I hope you can all see my mouse moving, and which is the natural cycle of the fungus, where it goes from old leaf stalk lying on the forest floor, infects new leaves, and then waits for those leaves to fall off, and then they will eat the small part of the small leaflets here, and they will overwinter in the leaf stalks, and then it will wait for next summer, and then it will continue its whole cycle. And this whole cycle is the whole cycle, or the life cycle that was also used by the native Hymnoscyphus species, the Hymnoscyphus albidus, which is being outcompeted by this invasive fungus here. So what happens in the trees are that the fungus just keeps eating down the leaf stalks, and then it will meet a shoot, and then it will enter the shoot, because it cannot taste any different. The taste the same. There's lots of sugar in the shoot or in the bark, and that tastes just the same for the fungus. And it's actually the host needs to stop the fungus from coming into the shoots in order to prevent this ash dieback disease. And what we call resistant trees, you can see I put it in air brackets, because they're actually not resistant, they're tolerant. They will still be infected in the leaves, but what they do is they stop the fungus. They have the same genes as the Asian normal host that can prevent the fungus from entering the shoots and the bark and causing this disease. So it's very important to remember this fungus is not a natural pathogen. It's not like importing Dutch elm disease or something like that, something grim like that. It is actually a fungus that lives off ash leaves normally. And of course, if that's the material you want to eat, you want to infect living ash leaves, then it's a very stupid idea to kill your host, because then there won't be any more leaves. So that's just it's very important to remember this also in the management, because it means that you cannot sanitize, you cannot prevent the disease by removing sick trees, because the fungus is also in healthy trees. So that's in the leaves of healthy trees, very important point. So that's why I'm starting out with this point here. Okay, so when this fungus arrives, you have sort of an establishment phase, and some of you have maybe already seen this timeline that I've showed before in earlier years. But you may see some sporadic ash dieback, but then the spread happens in the spread phase. It becomes widely spread, and you start seeing the infections on young plants and in young stands and on weeping ash, which is especially vulnerable. And then you start seeing the impact phase on older trees, and you have young stands that are really heavily impacted. And then finally you get into the phase where you are now, this sort of management phase, where you have the disease, it's widespread, it's impacting your stands, and now you have to start to make some management decision. You have susceptible trees showing severe symptoms, even dying. And so in this phase, the beginning of the management phase, it can be quite scary, because you will see trees, you feel like you see trees dying right, left, and center, and plenty of trees are sick, and you think, okay, they are also going to die, because the ones that are dying now, they were like this, a couple of years ago. And it's really important to remember that you will see sort of scary mortality in the beginning, because all the susceptible trees, they will succumb very fast. But after that scary phase, that's when you get into the phase where you have a lot of trees showing varying degrees of symptoms, but a lot of trees will also just linger and linger and linger and linger, and there will be some trees that will look healthy, and those are the trees you have to watch out for. You want to find the healthy trees that stand out among all the sick trees, because those are the ones that you want to breed from. That's what we've done in Denmark. Okay, so I'm just gonna go through the different sort of phases of the disease and the management for different age groups, because actually it's really important to remember that the level of management you can do and where you need to act differs a lot between age groups. So you just have to face young ash plants. So whether you are planted ash, like on the right here, we've planted some ash trees that we thought were taken from fairly resistant stock, but you can see they have very clear symptoms. So any young plants that you put in the ground, or any self-regeneration that you have naturally, you will see a lot of dead plants. And it just happens. And also in nurseries, not the first year. The first year you have, so if you buy 1-year-old plants, they will look fine, and then you put them out there, and next year 25% of them will be dead. That's the way it goes. So I always said, if you are going to buy any ash plants, that you buy 2-year-old plants, because at least you will see how bad they look. And we have an example here. This is a study we've made where in Denmark, a lot of the ash that are planted comes from 2 or 3 seed orchards, and we wanted to have a wider selection. So there was a selection of ash. This was before anybody knew anything about ash dieback. So there was a selection of ash, and the young seedlings were put in a seed orchard in 2004, just before ash dieback really became widespread. And 2 years later, in 2006, we began to see the first mortality in this seed orchard. And there was a very, very, very severe impact of novel ash dieback. As you can see, this is the graph here shows the mortality over 10 years. And you can see by the end of those 10 years, 80% of the plants were dead. They weren't just sick, they were actually dead. And of the rest of the 20%, a very small 6% of all the plants together, so about 1/4 of the survivors, the 20% that were still surviving, still alive, were actually healthy enough to consider to be useful as a future seed orchard. And you can see Lars Nørgaard, my colleague Lars Nørgaard, who has done all the monitoring here. He's standing in front of one of the dead plants, and at the back of him there's one of the few healthy, one of the 6% healthy survivors that actually have the genes that are useful for further breeding. So they are actually, this stand here has now been thinned out, so only the healthy survivors are left, and new healthy stock are put in to supplement them, and that will be a future seed orchard where we will be able to harvest tolerant progeny of ash dieback against, or progeny that are tolerant against ash dieback. So you can see it's a very, very rapid mortality on such young plants, and that's because, of course, the amount of shoot they have and the amount of crown they have is very small, so very fast everything is killed off, and everything is young enough to be edible for the fungus. So my management suggestion for plants, young plants that are up to 10 years old is, well, you will see the damage in the second or third growth season from nursery plant. There has been a very low survival of regeneration and plantings up till now. But we do have some studies where we have gone out into natural stands and we have collected progeny that looks healthy, and we have tested them, and we've also tested, we've done DNA studies, and we know who the mothers are, and we even in some cases know who the fathers are, and we've screened the mothers and fathers who are healthy, and we've actually been able to show that the ability to resist this fungus is actually passed down to a very high degree from the mothers and fathers to the progeny. And also we have shown that healthy trees, that those trees out in the stands which have been very much impacted by disease, actually make more progeny. So the progeny that does come up naturally will gradually become more and more healthy, because the healthy trees are the ones that produce a lot of seeds. So even if you have woodlands where you can't afford to do plantings, or it's too difficult, there will be ash trees out there. About 2 to 3% of the ash trees, maybe up to 5% if you're lucky, because you have a nice big gene pool in the British ash. They will actually seed themselves very proliferously, and the progeny that comes up will probably have very good health in the end. So there will be a natural selection going on, and it's very important for that to have that natural selection happening, and that won't happen if you go out and cut all the ash trees down because you think they're going to die. We are slowly having tolerant stock becoming available. We have made the first harvest on the selected seed orchards in Denmark, and they're now in nurseries and plants are being produced, and we are waiting to see if any Danish foresters will dare to put them out there. And we are also, of course, establishing our own progeny trial to test that we do actually see a good results. But we have also made some control crossings from Danish and Swedish material that's very, very heavily selected, and those control crossings have also made progeny that has been tested in the lab and in the field, and they are showing an extraordinary high level of disease tolerance or disease resistance, or what you want to call it. So the more we find, the better we find, and the more we cross them, the better the chance we will have that we will eventually fairly soon be able to replant those stands that have been removed with tolerant stock, and that's the future, the good sign. And it's very, very easy to know that these plants are tolerant, because if they are not tolerant to a very high degree, the disease ash dieback will happen very, very fast. So it's easy to test, to make this test. You just have to make the progeny, stick them out there, and the fungus will find it very easily. Right. So that's it for the very young plants. I'm sure you've all seen these sort of plants standing around dying fairly quickly, so you know what it looks like. So then we have sort of what I call the young stands, which are stands from about 10 to 40, 50 years old. Those are the trees that still have smooth bark, often green bark in the younger, and they will actually be attacked very heavily because they are not only attacked in the shoots in the top of the crown, the fungus is also actually able to infect directly via the young bark, via lenticels in the bark at the base of the tree, and down at the base of the tree, that's where all the old leaf stalks are all the old petioles are lying with the fruit bodies, so the infection pressure down there is absolutely tremendous. It is so huge. Some of the spores will be taken by wind and blown up into the crowns, and they will infect up there. But you can imagine the amount of hundreds and thousands of spores at the base of the tree, and so they get this sort of double whammy with both in the top of the tree and in the base of the tree. So that's really important. And the symptoms at the top is easy. Of course, you see all these dead shoots, the top dieback, and you can see the tree tries to regenerate with epicormic shoots, and maybe in some cases it can make a bit of a secondary crown, but those shoots will also be reinfected, and yeah, so it just goes downhill fairly fast if you have susceptible trees. And at the base of the stem, you can see here this in the middle here, you can see this green bark, natural green bark, and you can see this brown discoloration here, which is caused directly by the ash dieback fungus. Or you can see after a while the rest of the tree grows on, the living bark grows on, and you can see these quite slightly sunken areas here, where very characteristic with this shape here. And you can see when you cut it, the bark is dead, and it moves up the stem. You can see here again the green part that's healthy and the brown part that's dying because of ash dieback fungus, and you can actually isolate the fungus from here. And then eventually, if you have honey fungus in your forest, which we do most of the places, you will get honey fungus following the ash dieback fungus into the trees, and that is actually what eventually will kill these trees. You can see here I'm showing this tree, and when you cut this tree open, so this is the same tree cut open, you can actually see the infection points here from the bark going into the stem. And in the middle, you can see I've cut open this part. You can see where the healthy bark is white underneath, and where the dead bark is brown underneath. So it's quite clear what's going on. And actually, you can even see what part of this infection here is caused by the ash dieback fungus. Those are all the small triangles here that are just light brown. They're all the ash dieback fungus. And then you can see here the honey fungus coming in when the decay starts, because the ash dieback fungus is not a decay fungus. It does not decay the wood. So any decay you see will actually be caused by honey fungus, by Armillaria, usually Armillaria gallica in our conditions, coming in and decaying, using this dead bark created by the ash dieback fungus as entry point for a wider decay. And that is also what will cause problems in your timber quality, because it will decay the base of the most valuable part of the stem of the trees. So that's a very important thing, and that's something to look out for, not just in forest but also in your urban ash. Once you see this kind of infection here, you know there's not long. The trees have problems, very big problems. Luckily, we don't see it as much in the urban trees, but sometimes. And then also in forests, you have this secondary double attack. So the honey fungus, as you see coming in here, you can see the fruit bodies on this tree, and the top part of this infection here is actually ash dieback fungus, but the bottom part is very clearly the honey fungus. And again, when you cut this open, this is the same tree cut open, you can see the decayed part here, this half where the fruit bodies of the honey fungus is sitting is this decayed part. And then in the other part here on the left here, you can see the ash dieback fungus coming in. And in forest, you will also see ashbark beetles coming into the stem and breeding in the stems. Normally, these bark beetles are very, very secondary. They only breed in felled material, but they can, because these trees are dying, you know, they've been killed at the top and the bottom, and so they can actually also infect standing dying trees and breed in them. So that can be a problem. So you have so the young stands up to about 40 to 50 years. They are also very heavily impacted by this. See here again, I try to say which one is an ash dieback and which one is the honey fungus. So my management suggestions for stands aged 10 to 50, so these are all forest stands. You will see a fast development. That's the bad news, the sort of red parts of the bad news. But the good news is that even for young stands, you will see a lot of trees becoming very sick. You will see quite a bit of mortality, but in many cases, those stands will still be present even after 10 years, even after 20 years of infection. You will still see this happening. Okay, so what you need to look for in the young stand is you need to look for tolerant trees. So those single trees, 1 or 2 trees, maybe per hectare, 5 trees per hectare if you're lucky. And you'll need to look for those. You need to keep them. You need to take graft material if you want to do some breeding. And you need to do it before the whole stand sort of maybe dissolves, or maybe the forest owner decides to cut them down because he can't stand looking at all these horrible sick trees and so on. And if you do that, you may miss out some of the possible trees for breeding. What we suggest in Denmark is, if you have a stand that's being devastated by this disease and you thin out the sick trees, what you want to do is you want to mix in other tree species, or if you're lucky that you already have a mixed stand, it's very good, because then you won't completely just lose a stand. So you put in alder on the wet sites, maybe some poplar, some oak, some Sitka spruce. In Denmark, we often naturally have a sycamore, acer species coming in. And I know that this may not be an option in the UK because you have the grey tree rat, the grey squirrel problem, that you will have problems putting in other kinds of broadleaf species. So I realize that that's another one of the reasons that you have a lot of ash in your forest, is because it's doesn't get the grey squirrel problem. So I don't know to what degree that you can actually do this tree mix that we suggest for Danish growers. So, but hopefully then you can wait for some of the tolerant stock to become more available and replace sick trees with this instead. So in general, if you do have severely affected stands, well, one thing you can do is, if you can't stand it, if you think, okay, I've lost this thing, you can just remove it and start over with something else. That may be an option. Or if it's woodlands where the production is maybe not in the prime objective of your stands, just turn your back, let the nature take over, and come back and put some more trees, more ash in whenever you have the option. So those are the two, extremes of what you can do. And I mean, this is an example from the beginning of the ash dieback in Denmark. This was about a 30-40-year-old stand. It was just getting to the size where you could take out, sort of start the thinning and, take out a little bit of firewood or whatever. And it was severely affected by ash dieback. And you can see here the mortality at the base of the stem. You can see the infection by the ash dieback fungus, and then honey fungus coming in. You can see the white mycelium fungus. And this was like about just less than a hectare, which he just completely removed. And the forester just gave up. He thought, okay, so many trees are sick in here, I'm just going to give up. I'm going to cut them down and start over. And that is actually one of the big problems with ash dieback, is that you are losing the future timber stands. It's not so much that you're losing the timber now, because you can harvest the timber and you can sell it, and the old stands will last for longer, but you're actually using those stands that were supposed to be your timber stands 40 or 50 years from now. They're disappearing if you do this. So it's not now that the sawmills won't have any ash. They have plenty of ash to cut now. It's in the future you will see this problem. And also, if there were any potential tolerant trees in there that could be used for breeding, they're also lost. And on the European level, ash stands, or ash, especially on wet sites where you have ash and alder together, that's actually a protected forest type, and those protected forest types are also lost because you cut the sick trees just to get the timber, or for whatever reason you put in something else. In this case, the grower has put in Sitka spruce, and so he'll have a rotation of Sitka spruce, and then maybe when that's done, he will return to ash, because it's actually a very good site for ash. It's moist and in a very good spot. So, but there will be a whole generation of Sitka spruce there before he can return to ash. And by that time, all the plants and all the flora and fauna that's associated with ash, and very special ash, the ground vegetation is very special. That will all be lost. That will all be gone after one generation of very dark, very shady Sitka spruce. So it's not just that you're losing the trees, you're also losing this very special ecology that's associated with ash. And that is one reason why we try and ask people to be slow to remove the ash, because the longer you can wait, the more chance you have to save this very special ecosystem. Okay, so that's the sort of idea with the stands that you have up to about 50 years. So maybe I should ask Barnaby, are there any questions being asked about this so far that we should deal with, or should I just?
There's been a plenty of question activity so far, so it depends on if you want to go and tackle any of those at the moment. There were a few comments about people noticing basal lesions in some parts of the UK, including Scotland. And
Cool.
I guess it would be helpful if you just elaborated, as I put in the comments, that basal lesions are a temporal thing. So just because you haven't spotted them doesn't mean you're not going to get them. And I guess maybe if you could just say something about the context of ash dieback and how, and I get just to bring it back to everyone, although it's 2012, so we're almost 10 years on since it was identified in the country. It's been around here a lot longer. So thinking that it's taken this amount of time for some people to notice some of the symptoms to expect, I think that emphasizes back what Iben was saying, that this is we're only in the stage of we're noticing nasty stuff, and it's going to be an extended period.
Yeah. Definitely. So I mean, the basal lesion, once you see those, it's on the young trees, it's, I won't say it's pretty much over, but you're getting into the part where it will go fast. And if you and definitely if you have honey fungus as well, you really have problems. I have been contacted by a couple of growers in Britain who are saying, well, I have an ash stand, which, yeah, I have some dieback, but I prune them back and they actually look very good and they look very healthy. And so asking, well, what kind of story is there behind? And it turns out, okay, it's on agricultural land, so there's no honey fungus. It's actually, he actually has stands maybe that are quite open, so maybe the amount of infection at the base, because it actually takes quite a high moisture content in the air to get this infection at the base. So if you have stands that are pretty open and so in the initial phases where maybe there's not much ground vegetation and so on, you may not see these sort of infections at the base. But as the stand closes over, becomes more moist, then you will see these infections. And they happen all the way up till about age 40, 50, you will see these kind of infections at the base, because the bark is thin and you have these lenticels. And the thing is, the moister it is, the more lenticels the trees have, and the more infection points, so the more likely it is. And the more fruit bodies will be produced, and so the higher inoculum you have, more inoculum you have, so the bigger the chance. So it's just all like a perfect storm. You have ash on moist sites normal, because that's where it likes to be, and that's actually also the places where you get the highest rate of basal infection, which is actually what eventually will kill most trees. Because I mean, the very susceptible trees, they can die just from the dieback in the crown, because it's so bad. But the ones that are not so susceptible, they will have some dieback in the crowns, but it may not be so, and they will regenerate crowns and it will go on. But then when the fungus gets into the base of the tree, that's more or less it. They will still stand there and be there, but they will not produce anything. They will, yeah. Anyway, I will talk more about basal lesions a bit later as well. So
thank you.
Hopefully this is enough for now.
The only other thing I was going to ask to bring at the very beginning, you were explaining how it's a genetic code that prevents the fungus from getting into the stems when it infects the foliage.
Yes.
Is it the same code that prevents or enables it to come in a basal lesion as well, or is it something else in the structure?
No, I think it's the same. It's the same thing. Because what we see is when we have trees that are healthy in the crowns, they're usually not always, but often also healthy at the base. But not always, and I'm going to come back to that very much because it's actually quite important. So, but indefinitely, because what we see is when we make trials when we try to test the tolerance, what we do is we make a wound in the bark and we stick the fungus in there directly. So when we do the tests that we do to test the resistance or the tolerance, we don't normally go via the leaves because it takes too long. We just make a wound in the bark and stick the fungus directly in there, and those trees that are healthy, that show healthy in natural infection, they are also able to prevent this necrotic thing to happen. And you can see the necrosis just stays just around where the wound is, and it does not expand in the bark of the stem or of the branch or wherever you're doing the infection. We have done stem infections as well, and we can very clearly see that the necrotic area stays very, very small, which much means that those genes that code for the resistance are also active in the bark, because otherwise it would just spread in the bark. So the tests we have done very much support the idea that the genetic coding happens, and of course it should happen in the bark, because it's when the fungus meets the bark, when it tries to go from the leaf into the bark, that's where those genes should become active and stop the progress. So logically, I'm not a geneticist, but from what I hear from my colleagues. Okay.
Thank you.
So anyway, there was all the sad bits. All the young trees are going to die and young plants are going to die, and it's all going to go very fast and very nasty. But here comes the good bits. Okay, when you have mature stands, so any stands above about 50 years of age, you will probably see a very variable disease progression. You will see some trees that get really, really sick, like you see on the left here, hardly any left, and you will also see trees that look actually fairly good, even though their stands completely surrounded by sick trees. So those stands from I say from 50 to 100 years, but that can be up to, of course, any stand age that you can imagine. This is just because 100 years is about the rotation age in Denmark. So if you're from a forestry point of view, but you will see quite a bit of difference in the disease progression. And but what you will also see, and this is probably one of the biggest impacts that you have, is once Ashbark get into those trees, they will stop. The diameter growth will more or less finish. You can know almost not always, but most of the trees that I have looked at in forest, you can actually track the impact of Ashbark very, very easily, because you can take a disc out like you see I've done here, and you can see nice big year rings. And then in 2005, when the Ashbark arrived in the stand, you can see that the diameter growth since then has been absolutely minimal. More or less, is actually they produced a spring wood with all the big vessels to take up the water to flush, and that's it. There's hardly any autumn wood or produced, and that is what's called the valuable wood. That is the wood that gives you the increase in increment in your stands. And so the loss of diameter increment due to novel Ashbark is actually very severe. You can see here are based on 30 trees that we've taken from experimental stands, and the stand was inspected regularly for health. Oops, sorry. And you can see here in 2002 it was inspected, and the trees looked they were all healthy. They were all scored as healthy in 2002 by my colleague Bruno. And then in 2007 they were scored again, and he realized that they were looking quite bad. And then in 2010 we took out these 30 trees, and we took out 30 trees which had sort of some impact of Ashbark, and we took out 15 trees which were fairly impacted, and another 15 trees, is a green line, which are very severely impacted by Ashbark. And we took discs of all of the trees, and we took them home, and we analyzed the ring width. And you can see here, so the average ring width in the healthy period was about 2 millimeters. So every year they grow about 2 millimeters, a bit up and down depending on precipitation and so on. But once the Ashbark started to arrive, you can see the diameter, the increment crashed very, very rapidly, and it was only half or less than half for the severely impacted trees in less than 10 years time. In about 5 years time after the disease probably arrived in the stand. So you can expect that when your trees get sick, they will stop growing in width. And that's because all the energy of the tree is used to either regenerate the crowns in the top of the tree, or they're used to fight honey fungus at the base of the tree, or both. So there's no energy left for diameter growth. That's the first thing that goes when you have problems. You know that from if you have defoliation of oak by caterpillars in the spring, that then the diameter growth from that year will be much lower, or any other. If you have a dry year where the water is limited, then you will have a smaller year. And it's what you use for these dendrochronology stuff, and it's very clear that when the disease impacts your stands, then you will not. So there's no use waiting for the trees to get bigger, because they won't. You just have to be happy that they survive. That's the main thing. So for those of you who are timber producers, that is probably fairly bad news. If you don't have ash for timber, then it's maybe not so important for that the trees don't grow so much, as long as they're still alive. If we look at mortality, so this is a study we've done. We've followed the same stands for about 10 years, and we've looked at we followed some young stands and we followed some older stands, and we've looked at the mortality, and we've looked at the mortality. I mean, this is a very busy graph we have here, but we've looked at the mortality based on how badly affected were the trees at the start of the study. So we have at the start of the study, all the trees were alive, so 100% were alive, and you can see the red lines, the two red lines, they represent the trees that were already very badly affected. So they had more than 50% dead crowns at the start of the study, and you can see the young trees. So this is the lines, the dotted line, that's the young trees. You can see all of the young trees, which are about 17 together, all of them died within 6 years from the study. They were all gone. So if you are a young tree and you're very badly affected, you will die fairly soon. However, if you are a young tree and you still have symptoms, but not so bad, you can see, well, still about 70% of the young trees who were badly affected also died. But of the young healthy trees, you can see it's only almost 75% of the young healthy trees were still alive after 10 years. And there were enough of those that the stands could still be considered stands. The stands had not deteriorated to a point where where the whole stand was gone. There were enough trees left for it to still be considered as a forest stand, which were still there. And even better for the older trees, you can see, okay, there were some old trees, about 29 old trees that already at the beginning of the study were severely affected, had more than 50% dead crowns, and about half of those died. 55% of those old severely affected trees died. So if you're an old severely affected tree, there's about 50-50 chance that after 10 years you will be dead. But that means that the other 50% are still alive. Okay, they're still very badly looking, but they're still there. And in contrast, the older trees, which were not so badly affected, so had about maybe between 30 to 50% crown defoliation in the crowns, or were actually completely healthy, you can see most of those were still alive. So actually 85% of those mature ash were still alive after 10 years. Yes, they were sick, some of them, and a few of them had died, especially we had a very dry year in 2018. So then we looked at the trees in 2019, and even a couple of the one or two of the old healthy trees had died. But compared to the idea of, okay, all trees will die within 10 years, which I sometimes hear being bandied about, it is not true. And now we have been saying this for about 20 years, and now we actually have the data to prove it, to support it. And this is a study that's going to be published in Forest Ecology and Management fairly soon. It's just been accepted. Just today we got the final acceptance, and it's now being gone into publication. So very, very soon it should be out there. And here you will have your proof that yes, the trees will be sick, but they will actually survive for much longer than was maybe initially thought when we saw the first trees dying. And so if you only focus on those very, very sick trees and see them die, you forget about all the ones that are still there. And that's not a good idea. So, so my recommendation for management of ash that are above 50 years of age is it very much depends on the site factors. So the higher soil moisture you have, the more honey fungus you have, the faster you can expect trees to die, but there will still be quite a few left. So you will see probably a slow decline over a period of 20 plus years. I mean, we can't say anything about more than 20 years because that's about the amount of time we've had the disease in Denmark. We've probably arrived around 2000, but we still have quite a lot of ash out there. As I already said, you will see a fast decrease of diameter growth, and you will also see a lot of epicormics, so a lot of shoots coming out directly from branches, very rarely standing sort of straight up from a bigger branch. You will see these where the try to regenerate crowns, and generally if you have epicormics coming out of the crowns, that's fine. That's just the way of that's just the tree's effort to regenerate the crown, and that's fine. However, if you have epicormics coming out directly from the stem, this is a warning signal that this stem will soon not be worth anything if it's a timber. So if you have timber trees and you see epicormics arriving on the stems, that is your last chance to get those trees out and sell them for a amount of money that will satisfy your thing. You also, there will be basal lesions in older trees, especially if they're not much over, if they're about 50, 60, 70 years old. And you will also see ash dieback fungus getting into those older trees at the base of the stem, but it can be quite difficult to see it. And so what you normally see in older trees, you only discover these kind of infections at the stem base when it's honey fungus that gets in there, because the necrotic area will be very much clearer. And once the honey fungus gets in there, the discoloration of wood at the base of stem will also be much more pronounced and much worse than if you just had small infections by the ash dieback fungus. So it's really important for you to get some monitoring and management strategies up and running for these stands, so that you can follow the disease development, so you can react, so you can take out the timber if you want to, or if you don't have, if it's not timber stands, then it's maybe more you want to monitor the stands if there's public access really close. If it's along a road, you need to go out there and find those trees that are really heavily infected, because they will fall over. So, but the management strategy should not be, okay, I'm going to cut everything down, because if you do that, you'll lose out. You'll flood the market with a lot of timber at the same time. The ones that have a bit more patience and maybe keep back the healthier trees, well, they can win maybe 10 or 20 years from now, hopefully. So here are some pictures from those stands that we've been doing the work in, and you can see here, that's why they have these numbers, the lines and numbers, because all the trees that have been monitored have been numbered and marked, and you can see by now that the necrotic area at the base of the stem is actually quite severe. Up here, maybe it's still the ash dieback fungus working. You can see this red discoloration is quite typical. And you can see that the necrotic areas, the bark will fall off, or you can break it off sometimes, and you can see the sunken bark. You can see the rhizomorph often of the honey fungus arriving in there. And we've also taken samples of some of these wounds, and we have shown that the honey fungus is actually in there, but actually the ash dieback fungus is also in there. We've actually been able to isolate it or test it with the DNA methods, and to show that the ash dieback fungus is also in these kind of necrotic areas. So it will start out with the ash dieback fungus. How it gets in there through this thick bark, I have no idea, but we have shown it's in there. So it's present. So it's very important to find these kind of trees, because yeah, they are the ones that will be lost fast. And as you can see, this is actually from a little bog-like forest, which is actually very near a path, very busy bicycle path, and actually behind there is actually a railroad. So when these two trees fell over, the municipality was not very pleased about that, because it was quite lucky that nobody got hit by these trees. And that will happen. Once you see the necrotic areas in the base of the tree, that means the roots have already been attacked and have been infected, and the honey fungus will eat all the roots, and it will move up into the stem, and eventually the roots will break and fall over. So if they are close to roads or to railroad lines or in parks where you have a lot of public coming, and then you will need to act on this. There's no doubt about that. So eventually they will fail. But as you can see, all of these trees we had here, all these trees we've been looking at here, they're still standing. It's because they stand in an enclosed situation with a lot of trees around them, and none of our 290 trees have fallen over yet. Not before they died anyway. Okay, you remember I said, well, if they look healthy in the crown, usually they can also be quite healthy in the bottom, because they are probably fairly tolerant. But there is one little fly in the ointment here. In our looking at these trees here, the ones that are still alive, we have seen that mostly there's a good correlation between if they look healthy in the crowns, well, then also they don't have much basal damage. So the bark. So in this graph here, it's maybe a bit difficult, but this is the base, the X line here, X-axis here is the bark damage score. So the further up here is, the worse the bark damage is, and the Y-axis is how badly damaged are the how many trees are in each crown damage score. So the green here, they are the ones with the healthy crowns. The yellow are the ones that have some kind of symptoms. They are somewhat affected, but they have crown symptoms from 10 to 50%. The severe are the ones that are really more than 50% crown symptoms, and the ones that are dead or almost dead. And you can see here the red and the orange, they are much more a lot more of them here in the heavy bark damage. But you also have some heavily affected trees that have really bad crowns or almost dying, where we still haven't been able to see any infections at the base. And even more worrying, you actually have trees that look fairly healthy in the crowns. You can see they are scored as having less than 10% crown symptoms, and they still have quite a bit of bark damage score. So they still have quite a bit of honey fungus infection or Ashbark fungus infection at the base. And that's worrying, because if you only look at the crowns, if you're looking for which trees are dying or may have a stability problem, you may miss. If you only look at the crowns and you don't look at the base of the tree, you will miss these trees here. And these are the trees that could fall over while still looking quite good in the crowns. So if you are inspecting trees for hazard issues, for stability issues, you cannot just look at the crowns. You need to check the base of the tree as well. That's a very important to me message in all of this. And of course, even if they look healthy, you think they will survive in the long term, but if they're very heavily affected at the base, we expect that they will eventually die. Even though they are still alive, they still look good after 10 years. So the expectation is they will die. But the longer they are alive, the longer they are part of the stand, the longer the stand will last, and then we can hopefully put in either the healthy trees the ones that we want to breed on, those are the ones here, okay, they have healthy crowns and no symptoms at the base. These are the ones that are absolutely the best, and they're the ones we want to regenerate themselves and use for the future stands. So all of this ash dieback going on in Denmark, what has that meant for our ash, the amount of ash that we have? Well, we've tried to look at this. This is data from the Danish National Forest Inventory, and I mean the problem with this data is that we've looked at all ash. So these represent not just pure ash stands, but also any ash found in any kind of stand. So where ash is mixed into beech or oak or whatever. So this is like a sample strategy. We go out, we sample, and then we look at how many ash trees are there, what do they represent in area, and then we convert that to hectares. So this is of course not 20,000 hectares with pure ash stands. This is actually what the ash found in the sampling strategy, what they represent of the Danish forest area. So the Danish forest area is so and so much, and the ash occupy about 20,000 hectares of those 460 hectares, so how many thousand hectares we have. And we, in some cases, we know the age of the stand because there are forest maps, or we estimate the age of the stand by the height or the diameter or size. So we have age for about two-thirds of the stands that we look at, and we have DBH for almost all of the stands because we measure the DBH, and so that's converted to two different curves. So you can see if you look at the amount of age, where we don't, and in this case we've included the unknown, so where we have just unknown age, you can see we in about 15 years, 14 years, we've lost about half the original stand. So in 2005, when ash dieback was just becoming big impacting, and we had about 220,000 hectares of ash, and now we have about 10,000 hectares of ash, based on age. And if we base it on DBH measurements, it's about 57% of the ash. So about half of the ash area, or about half of the area where there used to be ash, there's no longer ash, if you want to put it like that. And but that means we still have quite a lot of ash left. It's not all gone. It's not all disappeared. It's actually still quite a lot there. So, and you can see the significant decline of the ash area. In the first years, we don't actually see any impact. There's not enough difference that we can see the impact. But after about 2012, so 10 years after we saw the very first symptoms, we do see a decline in the ash area. And it's very important to remember, this is not due to ash dying out there. Yes, there are some dead ash out there, but most of this decline is due to very intensive harvesting. So the ash are disappearing because of people going out and harvesting sick trees. And I can actually prove that this is the case, because you can see this is from statistics over harvesting of wood in Danish forestry. We do beech and oak by itself, and unfortunately we don't have a separate statistics for ash. Ash is just lumped together with other hardwoods of ash and maple and cherry and whatever, but ash does constitute the biggest part or ash and maple are the biggest parts. And you can see at around 2010-11, where the foresters really were beginning to see damages, you can see the increase in the harvest amounts, and almost all of this is due to ash. It's not because we harvest more. You can see it's about the same in oak and in beech, but the amount of ash being harvested increases very dramatically. And you can see that's actually been going on, and still in some years we're back to more or less the same level, but most years we still harvest more than we would normally do. You can see it's quite stable in the years before ash dieback. It's very, very stable, and then suddenly it explodes. So in average from 2000 to 2009, the average amount of other, what we call other hardwoods, was about 113,000 cubic meters, and then it almost doubled in the years after ash dieback. In average, that's the average. So you can see that it's actually quite increased. And if you look at our monitoring of ash, we have some ash defoliation monitoring in the forest health monitoring, and you can see here the average ash defoliation. In the beginning, it was mainly we had one monitoring stand with ash. This is this little lump here of ash defoliation. That was some very, very dry summers we had in the mid-90s, and then you can see ash dieback arriving around here, and then you can see it's quite back, and then we start having ash health monitoring in the National Forest Inventory, and we add more ash trees to the monitoring. And it's interesting, you can see here around before ash dieback arrived, we had about average defoliation of 12%, and after ash dieback arrived, we had an average defoliation of 31%, which means in average, all the ash trees are sick. If you have more than 30% defoliation, trees are considered to be sick. So very, very low defoliation before ash dieback arrived, and very high defoliation with a lot of variation. And you can see, okay, there's a huge increase of defoliation around 2011, and then it seems like, okay, it gets better. But the reason it gets better is, of course, not because the trees get healthier. No, it's because all the sick trees are being cut, as you can see here. You can see here this is the same graph as before, just shown now the increase in harvesting. So as you take out the sick trees, of course, in average, the trees that are left behind look better. And you can actually see here, okay, it got better. And then there was a bad year where we had a lot of sick trees. And then after that, immediately afterwards, you get also an increase in harvest. And that's the way it is. They go out, they harvest the sick trees. That means the ones that are left look better, which is nice. And then after a while, maybe some of them look sick. So then you go back out and you harvest again. And that is the trend that we're expecting. From now on, they will go out and take the sick trees away. The ones that are left will stand. Some of them will get sick. You will take those away, and so on. And gradually, you will only have the fairly healthy trees left. And hopefully, that will be okay. They will still be worse off than what before the ash dieback, but there will be trees out there. So that's a very important point. You don't actually improve the health of the stand by removing trees. You don't sanitize. It's not a sanitation. It's not removing sick trees and then there will be less disease. No, but visually, your impression of the stand and maybe the impression of the public will be that the stands look healthier because you're removing the sick trees. Whether that's something you want to have, it's up to you. But the idea is, and it's not just an impression. It's actually happening that you will have an improvement of health, of apparent health. And that's fine as long as you don't try and imagine it's because the trees are getting healthier. It's just because you remove the sick ones. So conclusions here, some of the conclusions here about forestry. It's really important to remember this is a forestry problem. It is very much a forestry and woodland, and in the UK probably also a hedgerow problem, because you have hedgerows that are very narrow forest in a way. The trees are sick. It will get worse. I mean, you haven't seen the worst yet, so you have to prepare yourself for that. But it's also important to remember that trees are not generally dying. Yes, there are some trees that are dying. The very worst trees, they will die. Or if you have stands that are, for some reason, are of very susceptible stock, you will have dead trees. But most of that mortality is happening in the young stands. The general mortality in all the stands is because the foresters go out there to harvest the timber, which is perfectly understandable. Why would you've spent 70, 80, 100 years on getting some very nice ash timber. Why would you want to see that lost? So it's perfectly understandable to do that. So, and you also have to remember the impact in mature stands will become visible about 5-10 years after you see the fungus, which is right now for most of you, maybe a little later for the people in the south of the country. And about another 5 or 10 years later, that's where you will really see the severe impact, especially with the susceptible trees dying. And the harvesting impact sort of lags another 3 or 5 years after disease development. So if your disease development is topping now, then your harvest will start increasing now as well. But in all the bad stuff that I'm saying about it's going to get worse and it's going to get bad and you will see more trees being ill and so on, it's really important to remember that it will take years. It is not going to happen overnight. It's not even going to happen within 10 years. It's going to last. I mean, we have been here. We're 10 years ahead of you, and we still have a lot of ash out there. And we still have ash trees mixed in with other stands. A lot of that is still out there. But we also have pure ash stands. We have some of the pure ash stands that we've been looking at are actually not very much impacted. Overall, in the whole stand, it's about maybe 5 or 10% of the trees that are really bad or are dying, and it's not really a problem. Just need to switch my phone off here. No. Okay, so it's very important, even if you're in a forest situation, even if you have a lot of sick trees, even if you have honey fungus going all over the place, it's very important not to panic, because a lot of the trees are actually holding on and are actually able to stay in there. So really, please do not panic. I know there are some reasons to panic somewhere, but not all over the place. And the longer you wait, the bigger chance you will have to have those tolerant ash put out there, so you can maintain these ash populations as long as possible. Or you will find the healthy trees that will regenerate themselves and perpetuate the stands. But if you remove the stands completely and put something else in there, that's it. It's lost. So be patient, but you also have to be careful. So if you have timber value, if you have ash stands of timber value, you should cut those to save the timber value. So go out there and save your timber, get some money in there for you to do whatever else you need to do. Or for safety reasons, along roads, along train lines, near houses, where you have a lot of public access, you need to be careful. You need to find those trees which are very badly off. Luckily, they usually have very bad crowns. They usually have very clear symptoms at the base of the tree. And those are the trees you need to find if they're close to roads or whatever. And it's also really important to remember it can be really, really dangerous, especially if this tree is dead or dying and you have a lot of honey fungus at the base of the tree. We have had people killed in Denmark, even very experienced forest workers. So I would, if at all possible, to use harvesters. I would recommend that. It's very, very important, because you can control it much easier. What you have, the natural ash woodlands, so they're not timber forest, I would just leave them alone if it's all possible. Maybe ask the public to stay away, or confine the public access to a few main roads where you can control the felling along those roads. And remember, again, it's felling trees that look sick means that the rest looks good, which can be a good thing in the public eye and can make the public and others understand that this does not mean that the whole forest is dying. There are actually good looking trees out there. And it's also very important that you do not transfer this fairly disastrous situation in the forest, because I mean it is a huge problem in the forest, but do not transfer this experience outside the forest, because apart from your hedgerows, which I understand from what I've been hearing, that your hedgerows are more like forest and you get a malaria moving from the forest out into the hedgerow. But if you're in Denmark, if you're in the open landscape, if you have roadside trees, and especially have open trees, you do not see the same catastrophic development. You should keep those trees. You should prune them rather than fell them, because obviously also if you have an urban setting or in roadside trees, aesthetics is really important. So and that's actually something I want to also to elaborate a little bit on, if that's okay with you. But maybe before I do that, I should ask again, Barnaby, are there any questions to the long talk that I've now done about the mature ash stands? Because it might be a good idea to take one or two.
There's a heap of questions and discussion that have been going on. So yes, I'm very aware on your resilience to be able to go and cope with this.
But is there anything about understanding things that people didn't understand, or it went too fast, or something that maybe if you have seen those questions, maybe they're. Otherwise, we'll just get back to them afterwards.
I think the best thing is to continue in them, because there's a whole spectrum of questions, and
right. Cool. Okay, no problem. I will continue. So with because it's not that much I have with the urban things, just to keep you online. Okay, so the first thing is really important to remember is that a lot of urban ash in Denmark, they're very, very healthy. They do not look bad. They look fine. And even, I mean, these pictures are taken while there's rampant ash dieback all over the place, and these ash trees are completely healthy. And there are sick ash trees very close to them, but even so, and we can I mean, why is this? Why are these ash trees here? You can see one in an open landscape, and here sort of half urban, half landscape, and this is completely urban, and this is in a private garden that look really. So you can see a lot of those ash trees around, and it's really important that you remember to look at them differently. The example here, my favorite example, this is a 300-plus-year-old ash tree in a churchyard, and it was actually destined for felling in 2013 because it had a lot of ash dieback symptoms, and the dead branches were dropping on the graves and on people, and they were worried, okay, there's a hazard here, and it's a sick tree, and okay, it's sick, it's never going to get well. So, and people are very much influenced by Dutch elm disease. When you have an elm tree that have symptoms, okay, it's going to die within very short. You might as well, and it's important to fell it because otherwise it will spread and all of it. This is not the case with the ash dieback. It's really important to remember that you can have trees that can regenerate. So the reason why this tree was not felled was because actually there was a citizen who actually sent me a picture and sent me an email saying, can this really be, why are they felling this tree? And I actually managed to get hold of the people who were in charge the day before the tree was going to be felled, and convinced them not to fell the tree. So what they did, they pruned the tree. The money they set aside for felling, they pruned the tree. The picture to the right is 1 year later, and it's still fine. I just talked to the lady who was in charge the other month, and she sent me some more pictures, and it's still looking fine. They've had to prune it again in 2020 because there were some more dead branches, but it still has most of its crown. It's still healthy. It's still a wonderful tree, and they love their tree, and they're so happy that they didn't cut it down by mistake. And it's really important. You do not get a 300-plus-year-old ash tree again in a hurry, right? So the ones you have, if at all possible to keep them, just hold on to them as much as you can. Also because there are a lot of biodiversity associated with ash, and if the ash disappears in the forest, well, they will have to move out of the forest into the landscape, into the urban, and associate there, and that's where you can keep them alive. So but of course, if they are standing near roads or in a churchyard or in a park or somewhere, you need to keep an eye on them. And here is an example. I mean, some of you may have seen the ash trees I've been photographing since 2007, and you can see these ash trees here. The one to the left is the healthy one. The one to the right has been sick several times, and the one, its neighbor, has also sometimes been sick. But you can see here in 2014, they're actually looking quite well. The healthy one is looking happy. The sick one is looking a bit, and the one that is sometimes sick is looking fine. So, and they're still green enough to be nice roadside trees. So in 2017, the third time the sick tree, this is the third time the sick tree has very severe symptoms. It had bad symptoms in 2009 and again in 2014, but it recovered and was okay. And then in 2017, it also has bad symptoms. You can see the neighbors looking fairly okay, and the one that's healthy is fine. And in 2017, for the first time, I also saw basal necrotic areas on this tree. So this, I've checked every time I went and looked at, and every year I took a photograph of these trees, and I've been checking. And for the first time this year, I saw basal necrosis on this tree and also on the neighbor tree. So this is like a warning sign. Okay, this is bad now. But it's still just in one place, just one place where it has this necrotic area. The rest of the stem is fine. In 2018, the one that was sick in 2017 was also very bad, and you can see that its neighbor is also getting quite bad. The healthy one is fine. This is a year with very dry conditions, so you get a few dead twigs, but there's no ash dieback symptoms. It's just like, and you can see the top of the crown is healthy, which is really an important sign here. And in 2019, you can see again. So this one has been looking very bad for 2 years. This one has been looking very bad for 3 years. And so that was 2019. And in 2020, the sick tree, so the one that was sick in the winter of 2020, so before 2020 growth season, this tree fell over. It actually fell on the bicycle path, but luckily there were no bikes there, and so nobody got hit by the tree. And you can see exactly that area where the necrotic area was on the tree in 2017. Exactly that area has now been have been decayed by honey fungus, and the most of the roots are gone, and it's actually disappeared. And the neighbor, the one that was looking bad here, it actually died. It never flushed. And you can see in 2020, when this tree was, the healthy tree was flushing, this tree was dead. I actually told the municipality they should cut this tree down because it was dead and it was going to fall over. They didn't manage to do it because of Corona and all these sort of things. And in November, this dead tree also fell over, also fell on the bike path. Luckily, no one was hit. And it also had necrotic area and honey fungus at the base. So it's really important. But I mean, those trees stood there since 2007. They stood there. Some years they were good looking, some years they're bad looking. There are more trees that are still unhealthy in this along this road, but you still got more than 10 years of roadside trees before you had to cut them down. So my advice about landscape ash, about urban ash, about roadside ash, you need to keep an eye on them. You do not fell them just because they look bad one year. You give them a chance to regenerate the crowns. Most of them will come back the year after. They will set out a lot of. And the reason for this is that in most cases, when you have roadside trees or urban ash trees, so they usually stand with a limited root space. You have the road on one side, and then you usually have maybe you have a field on the other side, and the farmer will plow right up to them. So you have very narrow road space. Or in the urban setting, you have like little square areas where the trees are standing. So the limiting factor for their growth for those kind of trees are their root space. And when you have dieback of the crown, the tree thinks, okay, I suddenly have a lot more roots than I have crown. I can put out a lot of new crown. So those trees, it's like almost like natural pruning. The crown gets pruned back, the tree comes back again, and the crown gets pruned back, and as long as it can keep doing that, that's fine. If the tree does not grow back, if the tree does not come back after those trees that suddenly did not come back a second year and the third year, that's when you need to cut them. If you're really worried, you cut them after the second year of bad crown. And when I mean severe crown symptoms, I really mean severe. I mean more than 50% of the crown dead. I don't mean, okay, you have symptoms. It means severe crown symptoms means more than 50% of the crown is defoliated. You do not see any leaves on that. So it really is severe crown symptoms. 2 years in a row or after the third growth season, that's when you cut. Never leave them for more than 3 years if they have severe crown symptoms. And if they're dead, you cut them straight away because they will fall over and they may hit some. If you have what I call veteran trees, so really big ash trees that are 200, 300 years old, if at all able to avoid cutting them, just keep them. Prune the dead branches away, keep pruning the dead branches away. If they're really, really bad, like the one you can see here in front of this old museum, and you can see it's actually quite root space, but it got very badly infected by Ashbark, and you can see they pruned it very, very heavily. Not just they actually pollarded it really a lot in 2014, and 3 years later, this is what it looked like. It was looked really, really fine. You do run a risk if you pollard the trees. You run a risk of them dying because all the crown that comes back are all these young shoots that are very susceptible to ash dieback. So there is a risk of the trees dying. But if the alternative is felling the tree because it's really, really badly affected, then I would always pollard and run the risk because a lot of them will come back. And you can see here, this tree here on the left, this is in the winter and this is in the summer. And I mean, yeah, it looks a bit strange in the winter because you've got all these stumped branches with little bits and pieces. But when you go there in the summer, it looks fine. Nobody that driving here would ever think this is not a nice tree. And you don't get a tree like this again. So spend the money on the pruning for safety reasons, and you will also gain aesthetic. It will look better, much better, because all the dead branches will be gone. Keep them as long as you possibly can. And like I said, and in the end, if the veteran trees, if you pollard, if they die, then leave a dead torso, 1 or 2 or 3 meters standing for biodiversity. Really, really important to keep that going. And I do have a final sigh. I just got somebody sent me this article from the Forestry Journal in March 2020, and in the beginning of this article, there is this little paragraph saying that it has led to the mortality of 95% ash across the continent. Why do I keep seeing this in British journals and citations? Even the Forestry Commission sometimes say it in some of their webpage. I try to, every time I see it, I try to contact people, and I get really, really pissed off. Sorry, but why do you keep perpetrating this mistake? It is not true. And will you please go around and whack people in the head when they try? I've been asked to put in a little article in the next issue of Forestry Journal to say this, because it is not true. We have a lot of ash left. And just because there's only 5% of the ash trees that are completely resistant does not mean the rest of them are dead or dying. No, because some of them have some of the genes and they will linger on for a long time. So will you please stop saying this in Britain? I'll be very, very happy if you do that. And that is all for me. Just showing you some very nice potted ash where my uncle and aunt lives in Alfriston, and they are very nice looking and they are very fine. And it's very important that you remember that even if you have a lot of sick ash trees, you also have a lot of good ash trees, and it would be a shame to kill them just because you're worried.
Thank you very much indeed, Iben, and you've spoken for a very long time and been very informative. I know a few people have had to leave, but they've given some compliments. Oh, guys, there's some virtual ways of virtual applause. That's almost.
Sorry about that. When I start talking, I will never end talking about this subject. So you should have pushed me along if it was a problem.
No, it's not a problem at all. And I'm just no. I think everyone's very appreciative that you've given the time to go and do this. And if you are happy now, there's a whole glut of questions. But I guess there've been a couple of questions asking what your thoughts are about deer damage, because it's been brought up by more than one of the audience, and that was in context. We've got a higher proportion of deer wandering across our land than in Denmark, and what sort of impact the deer may have on ash regeneration, and therefore the amount of the survivability of tolerant ash. Are we going to have to go and put tree tubes over every time we spot a bit of regen, or is it not going to be quite as serious as that?
I mean, we do also have quite a lot of deer browsing, but actually the biggest problem are actually mice. Whenever we do a progeny trial, the problem is the mice, they like to eat the healthy ones. So all the sick ones, they just die back, and then the mice go and eat the healthy, especially if you have a lot of grass. So actually, I think what we have problems with are actually more mice coming in and eating the base. They just take off all the bark at the base of the healthy ones, and they're very good at finding all the healthy ones. I mean, in Denmark, if you wanna plant ash, you have to fence, because otherwise deer will just browse all over the place. But if you have natural regeneration, I would guess it doesn't really matter, because ash is actually quite proliferate, and so you will have a lot of regeneration coming up. And of course, you may want to be more careful about the ones that are healthy, but I would think normally there would be enough that even if the deer ate half of them, you still have enough for it to become a stand. So, but of course, if you really want to have your regeneration going, then fencing would probably be a good idea. While it's just until they get above biting height.
Okay, thank you. What's next? I'm just trying to work my way through. It's like a small book worth of questions here. Mark Lebrecht, it might be best if you just go and take off your mute and ask the question directly, because it's quite a long one about the benefits of just leaving ash to decline. If you're still there.
Well, I would just leave it. I mean, if you don't have to cut it, for either because you want to save the timber or because of hazard, I would not cut any ash. I would leave as much ash as I could. But I mean, I've realized that in some cases you have to cut, because especially if you have ash in hedgerows that are really, really badly off, and you know there's honey fungus going there, or you can see the basal necrosis getting really bad. you have to go and cut them. But I would very much recommend that you are very careful. And what I would go out. I mean, if you are in charge of it, go out there every year, do a drive-by, take pictures, take your camera and film, or use Google Street View or whatever, and make sure that you catch those ash which have severe symptoms 2 or more years in a row. Those are the ones you need to find. Those are the ones you should spend all your time finding, not the ones that just look bad 1 year. And you can't remember from 1 year to another which ones are bad and which ones are not bad. You have to go. So I would just simply take a video camera and stick it, or a GoPro camera or whatever you have, and just film, and then go back and film. Like, okay, this tree was bad, or this tree was bad, and then go back a year later, say, okay, are they still bad? Okay, then I need to get the felling done. If they have come back, no problem. That would be my initial, if you're talking safety things.
It was, yeah, I think it was possibly more from a carbon sequestration sort of side of things. Is it going to be better for the carbon cycle to leave your wood on the soils and just allow the woodland to naturally regenerate, rather than having an impact of taking machinery in to take the wood out, which will also affect the soils and diminish the.
Yeah, I mean, it can be really difficult to get ash out because it's usually on moist soils, and it can be really. I mean, we've had a dry year like 2018 was actually very good because you could actually go out there with the machinery in some cases, but otherwise you have to winch it out, or, I mean, from a carbon sequestration, I mean, if you leave it there and it dies and it decays, then of course all the carbon is released. But and then you could say, okay, is it better to take it out and use it? Of course, if you can use it for housing or for furniture, then it's a very good carbon sequestration. But if you just burn it as in a fire plant, then it's the carbon is released anyway. But in general, yes, I would recommend do not go out in those woodlands. Just leave it there, if at all possible, because it's also good for biodiversity. There are a lot of things associated with dead ash wood as well, which is helped by this. So if at all possible, just leave those ash out there, dead or alive.
That's neatly segued into some other questions, which were about biodiversity, and is there anything else we can do to go and help the plants, or well, apart from the obligate species, there's 30 or odd ones of those in the UK that rely on ash, but there's a lot that also utilize ash. And I know there have been some publications in the UK, and there's been listing of that. But are there any experiences in Denmark or continental Europe where there's supplementary planting of species like privet or something else that's good for certain things that do like ash?
No, I think we've just, for so far, it's mainly trying to keep as much ash there as possible, and it's, I mean, the problem is often the reason why you lose these special is because a lot of the ash trees die, the stands become very open, you get a lot of grass in there, so the specialist flora that is underneath those ash trees disappear because it all becomes grass, and so, or you have so many ash dying that there's not and so it's, I think the main thing you can do is to try and have those stands be as intact as possible. And if that is best done by not taking any trees out because you go in with your machinery, or then I think that really is the main thing, is trying to keep those ash stands, hold onto them as long as you possibly can, because then you don't have to worry about putting other stuff in there. I mean, the only other thing, the problem is you could consider putting other ash species in there. So some of the, I mean, I know in Britain I've seen some pictures for that the Fraxus americana has actually done quite well, where it's been put into forest, and of course the manna ash, the Fraxinus ornus, seems to be almost resistant, or not getting much infections at all. But I don't know how much knowledge there is of the biodiversity really strictly related to ash, whether it can transfer to other ash species. I don't know that, and I don't know if there's any studies about that. So.
No, yes, that was the downfall of the research that has taken place, is that it rated other Fraxinus species particularly low just because of absence of data rather than presence of observations, and you end up with a possibly skewed picture suggesting that some conifers were better than other Fraxinus species just because the data hasn't ever been collected. So yes, read these papers and take a pinch of salt when you're considering what it's saying. There's been questions about various things about tolerance and basal lesions. One is, well, if you've got a tree with basal lesions, is it worth leaving for as long as possible? Well, yes, but is it possible for a tree that's having basal lesions, but as you've mentioned, a small proportion that have healthy crowns? Could those trees lead to heritable offspring that have a good tolerance, or do you think they're ones useful in the forest context of having some good crown?
I mean, we've gone out and collected trees that we thought were healthy, and then we've put them in the greenhouse, and then we've tested them, and you really have to be extremely resistant or tolerant or whatever you call it. If you have, because we found that even the ones that we thought were good, when we pushed the fungus in there, some of them failed, and I think those are the ones which would also fail with the basal lesion. So we have trees out there that we followed, and we have no crown symptoms at all, and they have no basal lesion. Even some of the young trees that we followed, they have absolutely nothing. They're completely healthy, and it's always about 3, 4, 5% of the population that seems to be totally rejecting the fungus at the top, at the base. If you stick it in there, it just completely rejects the fungus in all ways. And those are the ones that we are putting in our seed orchards. And we also make progeny trials. And if the progeny fails, because the progeny, you have to remember, the progeny is always starts out like a one shoot, and if that fails, it means it's useless. So if the progeny trial fails, then we go back to the seed orchards and we remove those mothers and fathers that have been involved in the fails. So eventually we will be left with trees that have shown the mothers and the fathers have shown every ability to resist the infection. The progeny have showed everything. We've tested themselves, the shoots we've taken off for the seed orchard, and they have succeeded in every way. And that, I think, it has to be that good for you to really go out and promote it as tolerant. So I would never, go for a tree that has any symptoms and there are trees out there that have no symptoms. So it's not like you will lose everything. And that's important to find those trees and protect them. And if they're about to be lost, it's very important to take material for preservation in other ways, so you don't lose a genetic ability.
Thank you. Yes, that's a message I remember Iben saying to me back in 2012, which is emphasizing keep looking at everything, keep monitoring, and yeah, I can't underemphasize that recommendation enough. Just get out there and look at it and make a note of it and come back to it, because with 3%, even only 3% of trees showing their useful level of tolerance, that's more than enough to repopulate the country with ash in the future. So the more trees we find across the country, that's more genetics, which then neatly segues into the next couple of questions. And that one attendee was asking, are these trees that are showing tolerance to ash dieback also showing tolerance to other things such as ash canker? And there's a second a question that someone asked about, what about emerald ash borer? Are people looking for tolerance in the same way that's in advance for that?
I don't know about ash canker, but I would expect that it'd be no worse or better than in general. So if we're lucky, it's also better against ash canker. It could be, but we have no real data showing any of that. As for emerald ash borer, now that's really interesting, because if you look at the Manchurian ash, which is one of the natural hosts for this fungus, it actually shows a good resistance both against the fungus and against the emerald ash borer. So hopefully, by selecting for tolerance of the ash dieback fungus, the Hymenoscyphus fraxineus, we will also have some tolerance against the emerald ash borer. And we actually do have some trials underway, because my colleague, my entomology colleague, Hans-Peter Ravn, who works, he has contacts in Ukraine and in Russia, and we have actually taken some of our selected material to Ukraine and Russia and given them to people who work with emerald ash borer there, for them to test against emerald ash borer. So they will use it. They will use their to breed emerald ash borer and see if the eggs can hatch and if the larvae can actually get into these trees as a test material. So we expect that some of them will fail the emerald ash borer test as well, but because the amount of resistance to emerald ash borer is much lower than to the ash dieback fungus. But if we can find some of them which also show good tolerance of the emerald ash borer, that would be like a miracle. But yeah, that is in the very initial phase, and it's quite difficult because it's not so easy to collaborate because we can't bring the emerald ash borer here and test. Of course, that's completely no. So we have to do it over there, and we have to find somebody to work with over there. It's we have some good contacts, but they have to find money, and it's not so easy for us just to give them money to do it, because there are all kinds of So, but we try.
Okay, thank you. Right. A sort of health and safety side, there's been a lot of conversations about that going on. Well, Rachel Riley was wanting to know if the risk of the damage at base was just down to honey fungus, or if it was actually the stability risk was caused by ash dieback. And from what I'm aware of, other scientists' studies, some of you may who are in the tree health group may remember a few years ago there was an Austrian scientist, Katharina Schwander, who'd been putting pressure and tugging trees, and I believe that research went and showed that trees with lesions did have weaknesses at that point of an ash dieback lesion, and I guess that's because that part of the wood's been killed, and so it's not going to have that integral strength. So that would be my non-scientific review, that I'd have thought that both honey fungus and ash dieback would have some impact on the stability of a tree at the base.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things. I mean, the one thing is that because of the ash dieback, the tree, the increment, the year rings are just springwood, and that means that you don't get increase of strength, because the springwood is just like nothing, and you don't get the late wood, which is actually what gives the strength in broadleaves. So you're not adding any strength, and if the crown is still big and you're not adding any strength to the base of the tree, so I guess you could say that yes, in some ways ash dieback it does have an impact on the stability, but I would say most of it comes from honey fungus, and for a tree to fall over, it's almost always because the roots have been decayed by honey fungus. It's not that I have seen that many ash trees fall over. It's not a very common thing, but those trees, two trees I showed, they definitely had honey fungus in there, and the roots were completely decayed. And ash dieback fungus does not decay. It is not a wood decayer. It's really important to hold on to. So any deterioration it causes is like indirect. It's not because it takes away the strength of the wood, but the problem is it is the first to get in there, and it opens the way for honey fungus. It kills the bark, and the colleague we have been doing, who has been doing all the field work, he has actually done an interesting little, it's like a little side study. He's actually removed the soil, and there's a lot of moss and vegetation, and he's actually looked at the roots at the surface, so the big roots that come out from the stem and are just at the surface, and he can actually see, because the root bark is actually quite thin, and he can actually see that there are quite a lot of Hymenoscyphus infections, so ash dieback fungus infections on those roots, and it's quite clear it's the ash dieback fungus that's in there. And then when he comes back some years later and look at the same roots, the honey fungus has gone in through those dead areas. So I have no doubt the ash dieback fungus, the way it acts at the base of the tree is by making a lot of entry points for honey fungus to get in there and very, very fast deteriorate the roots. And that's why it's so dangerous. And that is why the trees fall over. And so you have to think about that. You have to be aware, not just to look at the crown, they're bad. You have to look at the bases, especially if you have very big trees and very old trees with big surface roots. You really have to look at those to see if you have problems there.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, I can't even get my words out of my mouth now. Does it take two tolerant parent trees to go and end up with tolerant offspring?
Yes.
So it's always got to be two.
You have, I mean, yes, you can have, I mean, they both contribute. And so, of course, mostly you look for the mother to be very, very tolerant, but actually we've shown by using different fathers that it actually does also contribute very much. You will get some tolerance. So you get this sort of, you get a spectrum of tolerance. You get some that are fairly tolerant and some that are more tolerant and some that get some very, very tolerant. So you will still have, so the trees that are out there, if they had a tolerant mother and the father was not so good, well, they're still better than the ones that had, you know, very bad mother and very bad father as well. So you will get a spectrum, but for the breeding, you need both. You need the tolerant mother and the tolerant father. It's not good enough if you don't have that.
Okay, thank you. And another genetic related one. There were observations, especially a number of years ago, in papers about tolerance being associated with leaf senescence happening at an earlier time. Are you observing this on all the tolerant-looking trees, or is that just another potential trait that helps a tree not get the fungus attacking it because it's dropped the leaves?
It seems pretty clear that most of the ones that we have scored as tolerant also have early senescence, but the difficulty with that is we don't know, is it because they are naturally early flushers and natural senescent, or it's because when the fungus tries to get into the shoots, they just release their leaves. So it's a like kind of disease escape, and it's also really difficult because you have to, you really should have observed the trees before you have the ash dieback there to know, are they that way without any influence of the disease, or is it just a matter of, because some of the trees we think were not, because they are not necessarily early flushers, and if they're not early flushers, they should not be early, and also this early senescence is like, it's in August, September. And normally in Denmark, we would see trees dropping leaves in October or November, so after the first frost. So it's still pretty early for ash to drop those leaves. So it seems like it's not a natural leaf drop. It's actually induced by the fungus. So it's really, and maybe those genes that give the resistance or the tolerance are actually the genes that also makes the leaves pop off very early. We don't know yet. Then you have to identify the genes, and you have to think out, okay, what are they involved in, and you have to test it. And so I think it's more of a observation that you can do, and you can maybe you can use it to find trees that have good health, because you see, oh, this tree is dropping its leaves early. Maybe I should keep following that tree because maybe it has actually the good genes. So I think it's maybe the other way around, that it's maybe something that pops up and say, okay, that may be a good tree.
Thank you. Right, there's a question from Ian Braddock just asking if there's a quick, simple method for identifying ash dieback during the dormant season. Well, I think that depends on the size of the tree. With the small trees with low down branches, the lesions do stick out when there's no foliage on them. The discoloration is very obvious, if you, and I guess another thing you can do is have a scrabble around on the undergrowth and look for the distinct rachis, the leaf stalks, the black leaf stalks that the fungus will be overwintering in. So if you're finding presence of that underneath a tree, It's not just magically got there. For more mature trees, I guess I was going back to Iben's presentation about the way the crown looks.
Yes.
So it's the structure. So seeing those epicormic growths in the crown where it's maintaining itself, or if you're seeing signs of crown dieback and epicormic shoots on the main stem, well, hopefully it will be obvious to you that there's some signs of ash dieback.
I mean, it's very, very it's almost weird because in after some years in Denmark, it's very strange to see a natural ash tree, because all the ash trees they have all these epicormics, and it's very distinct because they stick out like they're completely vertical from the big thick branch. You have this big thick branch, and you have all these things, all these twigs sticking up vertical, and that's very, very obvious. So it was when I came to Ireland, and I came to Scotland, you know, in around 2012 and 2017, and it was so weird to see all these natural looking ash trees. Like, oh yeah, that's how an ash tree is supposed to look like, because all this natural crown structure and everything. I mean, you hardly see it anymore here because it all looks really weird with all these epicormics sticking out everywhere. So I think after a while, it's just like you have more ash trees that look strange than look normal.
So things to look forward to.
Yes.
Jackie Dunn had asked a question about is there any monitoring going on with the ash? And that being with the aerial surveillance happening in the Forestry Commission, there are some sites that are being repeatedly filmed and photographed just for you know, as even suggested, we need to keep monitoring and seeing what's happening there. But it varies from site to site. So you can have different woodlands fairly close to each other with different levels of dieback in. So yes, where you're monitoring, it's what are you monitoring it for? You can't go and say you can't come to conclusions and say that everything is in the same situation. I spend a lot of time driving around, and you get people saying, "Oh, all of Kent, it's all the ash is dead there." And well, like Iben said, all of Denmark, 95% of the ash is not dead. It's there's been mortality, and there are bits that are better and worse, and it's down to individual site conditions and what's going on with those trees. Yeah. So that's me getting up on a high horse. So, but yes, there is monitoring going on, but I'd suggest that, you know, don't rely on the Forestry Commission to go and do the monitoring for you. Go and set up your own observations and take your own photographs. Okay, what's done that? Someone would like an intranet article about to go and correct the 95% statement. That sounds like a really good idea, that if we let ourselves and the Forestry Commission know that even in 2021, that's still coming out. That must be very depressing for you, Iben. I'm sorry.
I know. I mean, I
apologize.
Like 10 years of my life trying to whack-a-mole this thing down, and every time it just pops back up. I mean, just this spring, I've had 3 different people telling me 3 different examples of this going on. I'm like, please.
Right, I've nearly scratched down to the bottom. Someone's been very patiently had their hand up, and I'll get to you on their hands up once I've finished the questions. People, other questions about monitoring and suggesting that this surveys be done by forest research of the way that they go and look at larch sites, but I don't think there's a resource there for larch. Is a very targeted point. You're sending them to a single site to go and identify presence or absence of a quarantine organism, but with ash dieback, you want to be able to go and interrogate your stand and pick up where you've got those useful looking trees and then be able to return to them. So
Google Street View is a fantastic tool. I mean, I use it all the time. You know, I get told this tree is bad, then I go on Google Street View. You can go back in time and you can look at the tree. And I mean, obviously some of the time they do it in winter, so maybe it's not so. But you can often find it, and then you can see, okay, so. Or even, I mean, I think you could, because I think your biggest problems are actually those hedgerows. I mean, Denmark, we don't have these forest-like hedgerows, and people have been telling me, well, if you look at hedgerows, they're almost like narrow forests, and so we have the same sort of disease development as in forest, and the problem with hedgerows is they're usually along the roads, right? So I think that's probably where you have your biggest challenge compared to almost anywhere else in Europe, is because you have these really special hedgerows with a lot of ash, and I've seen some of them. I mean, I've been driving around with Barnaby, and we've we've seen them, and it's so you drive along and say, oh, there's a dead ash, oh, there's a sick ash, oh, there's a, and I think probably that is where you will find the next 5-10 years that you will have to do a lot of work. But it's really, even there, it's really important to not just go out and cut everything down, because and not just because they look bad one year, because even the tree look bad one year can actually come back. But and then so. But it's really difficult when people say, why do they cut all these ash trees down? And sometimes well they have to cut them down. They can't just leave them, because if you leave them, they will fall over and then they're gone anyway. And you might have some people die or something. So it really is a balance. You really have to find that balance between finding the right trees and get those cut down, and then leaving the others. And maybe educating the public a bit about, okay, we're going to leave some of these woodlands, but the price for leaving these woodlands is that they will be dangerous to walk around in. So can you stay on the edge, or can you just stay on, don't go into the stands? Or, I mean, if the public is upset about these woodlands being, cut down, well, you said, well, the price for not cutting them down is that you have to be aware that they're not safe to walk in. So is that, when you pay that price, will that be okay? And I know it's difficult, but at least give them the option of discussing it.
It will be interesting to see, yes, the routes that people go and decide to take. At the moment, it's certainly a lot of preemptive work, and as you said, it's very understandable that if there's timber resource, you want to go and utilize it, and you want to go and ash trees are dangerous enough to fell when they're healthy. So yes, if you're a contractor, it's makes sense to still fell them whilst they're relatively healthy, rather than wait to get to a certain situation. Right, I think we've trundled down, apart from that, the suggestion of observations. Well, I know there were a number of volunteers who were in the meeting, and so yes, I want, if you're going to suggest to your observatory colleagues, maybe if you can find a local ash stand to adopt and look for that 3% of healthy stuff, that would be good.
Or any ash you pass on your way to work, or on your way to the shop, or in your, get out your mobile phone and just take a picture of the crown, and then when you come back, a year later, do it again, and then when the municipality or whoever wants to cut the tree, you said, no, I have shown for 10 years that this tree is healthy. You can't cut it down, sort of thing. I mean, anything, any sort of proof. Or on the other hand, if you want, if it's cut down and people are around and saying, oh, why are they cutting down? I said, well, it's been looking bad for like 2 years, and it has problems at the base, and it's just not any documentation that can, prove that you have made the right choice is really, really important, I think, in this case.
Thank you. So James, you've had your hand up for a very patiently long time. I think it's about more than half an hour now. So if you're still alive, do you want to ask a question?
Hi, yeah, hope you can hear me. Yeah, I've got 2 questions really. The first one's about pruning. I just wanted to check, you're definitely advocating pruning as a cosmetic and a safety tool, rather than any implication that pruning could be a cure or remove ash dieback from trees?
Yes, but you will also, if you prune the sick branches, you will prevent the fungus from moving further into the tree. So in some cases, you will actually also help the tree. But the thing is, they usually stay quite outside in the outside of the crown. So, but yes, there is a slight health improvement as well. But it's the main thing is aesthetics and safety. Yes.
Okay, that's interesting, because there are people out there who have possibly misunderstood the message and are trying to prune to cure, and promoting pruned stock as cured, and I've always been very skeptical, so that's why I was a bit keen to ask when I
mean,
saw
if you
your
have
presentation.
very young trees, and you see an infection on a branch that's moving towards the main stem, cutting that branch off is of course preventing that infection from reaching the main stem. But the thing is, if you have a tree that can be infected, it's just a matter of time before another shoot is infected. I mean, are you going to go to that tree every year or every other year and look at it and take out branches that are where the infection is on the way to the main stem? I mean, you really, really have to have a valuable tree or a tree you care about to do that. I mean, and I know some people, I've been contacted with somebody who's done that. But I mean, if you have half a hectare and you really, really want to keep those trees going, then you can do it. But if the trees are infected, that means they're susceptible. That means eventually they will be infected again. So it's not, yes, you are curing it for that particular infection, but that doesn't mean it won't be infected again at some point. And eventually it'll be big enough that you can't reach to prune those branches away. And then what are you going to do?
That's really good to hear, because that's kind of been my approach with it. But I was just wanted to check I'd understood it correctly. The second question is, in big blocks of ash with similar genetic provenances, are you still? It was really interesting seeing the photos where you'd got healthy trees next to dying trees, because I've not seen that in my part of the world, and I was just wondering, are you know, if you've got trees that have come from the same provenance, possibly the same seed stands, are you actually seeing those random trees in there that are really healthy, or are you generally seeing what I'm seeing, which is all the trees are sort of affected in the same way?
We have not been able to show any relation with provenance or seed or a specific seed sort. It is an individual thing. So yes, you will see individual trees, because I mean, obviously, if you have clones, then they're all going to be the same. If you have offspring of the same mother, they will all inherit her disease level, but they will have different fathers, so they're siblings. So if we have sibling trials where you can see that the siblings, you can have one that dies very fast, you can have one that looks really healthy, you can have three that looks, half healthy, because they all have different fathers. So it is, we have not been able to show the specific provenances are better. There are some that say that if you have the amenity tree, Fraxus Excelsior, West Health Glory, that seems to have a slower infection rate. So if you have that in your it's better than maybe other kinds of ash, amenity ash. But I don't think anyone has done a completely sure reckoning of this. So I think even if you have a stand where 90% of the ash trees are dying and falling over, you can still have that one thing, even if they come from the same seed source, because a seed source is usually from several different trees. So if you have like a seed orchard with 100 trees, and you have only one mother and one father that are good, then it will only be those few plants that come from the seeds from that single mother that has been pollinated by that single father that will be resistant or tolerant. All the rest will have different mixtures of tolerance. So unless you're talking clones, you will have an individual level, and there will always be one out of 100 or 200 or 1,000 that will pop out different. So, but of course, there are also seed sources which have very, very, very high susceptibility, which are very infected, can be very. And if you have that, most of it will go. So that's probably what. And you also have to remember what you're seeing right now. You are seeing all the bad trees getting really sick and dying. And once they're gone, and they're about maybe 10-15% that go really fast. Once they're gone, you will be in that sort of slow development mode where they get sick and then they get a little bit better. So don't get discouraged by seeing a lot of sick trees and a lot of mortality right now, because you're in that acute bad phase where all the really susceptible ones are reacting really badly.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you. That's been helpful.
Right. Has anyone else got any other questions?
I've talked you all to death.
yes. Eben's successfully batted off everything. So she's answered it all. That's
and I would like to say, if you have any more questions, or if you want to, I mean, also if you want to borrow some pictures, I'll give Barnaby a PDF of my presentation. He can put it up on the website and all of that. But if there were anything you want to specifically know, you're always welcome to send me an email and ask if you want to borrow some pictures, or at least the ones that I've taken, I can show you. And I will, and as soon as the paper comes out, I will give the links to Barnaby so you can see that paper that's been published. And so, I mean, I'm happy to, and if you come up with questions after this, and you can always send me an email. I'm happy to reply and help out anything that can help you deal with this situation.
Thank you very much. I definitely will go and share that link. And yes, so several foot up in the conversation on, so I guess it's probably somewhere near the ceiling now. There was a discussion, a desire for other supporting papers and links. So if you've got some that you can suggest from yourself and your colleagues that are worth attendees here reading, and I'll see if I can find I'll dig out the alternative species work that's papers that have been done in this country. So
I also have a paper coming up. It's just a short paper in the Journal of Arboriculture about ash dieback in urban settings that repeats all these things about some of the same pictures you've already seen, and so that's because of course most of what I have is in Danish, but that will be in English, and the paper that's coming out in the forestry issue will be in English, and so that will be something that I can once they have been published. The Arboriculture Journal is coming out in June, and once that's published, that can be something that you can copy and give to people and explain what's hopefully a bit more what I've been saying here.
Thank you very much. That's absolutely fantastic. And yes, I think on behalf of everybody who's hung on, because it's been much longer than anticipated, but that's because you've been so kind to go and answer all these questions and go and deal with it. We all really appreciate your enthusiasm and willingness to go and share your expertise.
Thank you for listening to me for 2 hours. It's like I'm impressed that so many people hung on.
Well, if everyone wants to go and take off mute, and you can give them a genuine round of applause rather than a virtual one, and I advise you to do that now. So say thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Iben.
Thank you.
It's a fairly unpleasant experience doing virtual presentations compared to seeing a real audience, and it's rather unnerving. So thank you for some of you being able to have the screen on, and thank you for interacting so much. It's much appreciated. We're going to have, at some point, I need to go and organise a meeting to give everyone a long overdue update on what's been going with Phytophthora ramorum last year. Thankfully, Iben's been an excellent excuse for me not to organise that so far. It's kind of kicked that in the long grass, because this is a very important subject that Iben's covered. So, but at some point I shall have to tackle that. But that's probably what the next meeting will be in the springtime. But unless anyone else has got anything they need or want to say, thank you very much, and I'll go and share everything with you as soon as I got the hang of sharing videos, which I did do successfully eventually, but it took me about a month or so to try and work out how you get it outside our firewalls. But I'll check through my notes and work out how on earth I did it the first time round.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Barnaby.
That's okay.
Okay. Thank you, Barnaby. Bye.
Thank you, Iben. Bye.
Thanks, Barnaby. Bye bye.
Stop recording. Right.